De Esperanza United, soy Aida Negrón, especialista en comunicaciones bilingües, y esto es Conversations over Cafecito. En Esperanza United entendemos que la visibilidad y la representación de nuestra comunidad son importantes. Únase a nosotros mientras entrevistamos a defensores, miembros de la comunidad, líderes de organizaciones sin fines de lucro, pioneros y personas que influyen en las políticas sobre sus contribuciones para poner fin a la violencia de género, lo que ellos desearían haber sabido y cómo sus experiencias de vida han influido en quienes son hoy día. Welcome to Conversations over Cafecito. Today we have Michelle Vilchez with us. Michelle is a longtime community leader, educator, and advocate for justice and equity in education. With over 30 years of experience in civic engagement and family empowerment, Michelle leads with deep cultural pride, spiritual strength, and a commitment to opening doors for others. First of all, Michelle, do you drink coffee? It is okay to say no, and if so, what do you like to drink?
Thank you, Aida. It's such a pleasure to be here. And of course, always wonderful to see you. Just feel so honored. So not to offend anyone, I cannot stand the smell and taste of coffee. It's not to offend anyone. I'm married to a Cuban Mexican who needs an extremely strong cup of coffee to function at least 4 or 5 times a day. And I am the complete opposite. I feel so bad about it. I am more of a chai or a tea. Like, give me a good black tea or a green tea or chai, and I will be happy as can be. Chai latte is my favorite. So that is what gets me up in the morning. And truthfully, what also gets me up in the morning is like being awoken by chickens and ducks. We had at one point 22 ducks, Aida, and 5 chickens. So the noise that is what woke me up more than anything, than any coffee. We no longer have the 22 ducks, but that's what helps.
Okay, Michelle. That's perfectly okay. Don't worry about it. Just wanted to know, about what do you like? So please tell us a bit about yourself before we go deep into the questions that we have for you today. Tell us about yourself. What are you doing now, Michelle?
Thank you, Ida. So I can tell you a little bit. I've spent the last 30 years in community service in some way, shape, or form. I was looking back and this afternoon or yesterday afternoon and looked at all the many ways that I've just had such a blessing and the pleasure and the honor to be a part of such movements. And I met you at an organization that I was at for 21 years. And when I made the change, and I was more than anything committed to building opportunities for democracy and civic engagement. When I look at like all that I have been involved in over the years, that's been an overwhelming theme, is like, how are we building democracy and citizenry, or democracy building, and civic engagement pathways. And so here I am at an organization by the name of Innovate. We believe that when it comes to educational outcomes, parent leaders from across the nation need to be a part of the conversation that is happening in regards to their children. They need to understand the power and influence that they can have over local policies and statewide legislation that actually continues to improve impacts for children in the K-12 educational system. And we believe that because we think that education is fundamental and foundational to all the other crossroads. There's intersectionality that exists between education and generational wealth, education and post-secondary engagement, education and housing. There's a number of cross references or intersections that take place across this theme. And what we do is really, in essence, we believe that there is this framework of organizing, the organizing cycle. And if we can really bolster and build the capacities of parent leaders across the state of California, but certainly across the nation, then we can start to see some of the shifts happen within the system of education and beyond.
Wonderful. So your work in education spans generations. What are you seeing in today's youth that gives you hope?
Oh my goodness, there is so much to be excited about. One thing I have to say that I'm so excited, and I think that we need to acknowledge is just how unapologetic our young people are right now, and how civically minded and politically aware they are. I remember myself at 17, 18, around the high school, middle school age, and I was clueless. I mean, I think if you probably would have asked me who was the president at the time, I might have been able to answer the question, maybe not, just depending on, that particular day. But when you talk about our young people today, I think what's powerful is that they have access to information and data much quicker than we do. So they understand how to navigate through that. And, if you look at states like California, there were young people who have been at the forefront of campaigns that have been pushing out on policies or increasing the voter timeline for young people not to be 18 but 17. There's this readiness, there's this enthusiasm to really push forward, and it gives me tremendous hope, because young people, if we look across a variety of themes, whatever it is, because we really feel like ultimately we're theme agnostic, it's about getting people plugged in. Young people are setting the course. They're being the examples for all those of us of other generations. I was going to say older generations, but other generations to really help to not only be the leaders, but the ones who are pioneering so much. So we have a lot to learn from young people in terms of that unapologetic and very strategic and intentional approach.
Very good. And as a Latina leader working with families, what cultural values do you see being passed down or lost, maybe in our communities?
Mhm. I was raised in an immigrant household, and there's so much that I am so proud of and feel very honored. Values that probably won't be very unfamiliar to you either when we talk about resilience and collectivism, or, this idea of how we can work together to accomplish a particular goal and objective. A deep care for family that is really passed on generation and generation. Some communities would call it grit. Others would call it like this survival mentality. And of course, that comes with challenges too. When you're looking at variety of vulnerable communities in a space where we want to uplift traditions such as language or history, those values are continue to be really critical. And, we work with thousands of families across our efforts, and those remain the same. When you hear and you speak to families who love their children so much, there's nothing they wouldn't do for that child. That sacrificial approach to parenting is how I was raised. I mean, there wasn't anything that my parents wouldn't do for me. I think that it's not necessarily that we're losing it. I just wonder if there's so many competing agendas and competing pressures. And as it either gets harder to sustain your family financially in a particular region or state throughout the United States, I think families are having to make real hard decisions on what to prioritize. So, it's not that it's a lost value from my Latina culture in any way, shape, or form, or when I'm engaged with other Latino communities across the variety of different communities we work with, I think that families just unfortunately are having to make difficult decisions and are having to balance challenges and barriers that they may confront in any given day. So that looks different in Los Angeles, San Francisco. It looks different in Utah, Salt Lake City, Utah, or Denver, Colorado, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Families are just having to make really difficult choices.
Thank you, Michelle. Um, okay, can you share a personal memory that shaped you, how you view your role as a cultural carrier or change maker? Because you are.
I it's a lot to take in to consider yourself a change maker. I have to remember that that was passed on to me. It was a legacy that was passed on to me. I was inheritance, if you will. I have to tell you, I think I have shared before, Ida, my mother and my father were very significant role models in my life. My mother and my father came to this country and were farm workers for decades, and then later became faith leaders, and really emphasized the importance and value of community, and of change that we could create. My dad would say on a regular basis, like, if you have two hands that can do work, there's a lot that needs to be done. My father would constantly say, the harvest is full, but the workers are few. Like, what is it that we can do? He would also say, to whom much is given, much is expected. So it, like, all of these dichos that we like to say, these sayings that we would use in Spanish or in English around what that looks like was constantly given. I remember years ago, I had the distinct pleasure of being a WK Kellogg Fellow for about 3 years, and that folded into the first year of the pandemic. And I remember being in Mississippi. They had taken us on a 4-day kind of sojourn path and experience so that we could understand what it was like to be in the shoes of others around that region of Mississippi back in the 50s or the 60s, what education actually felt like and looked like to be a Black American or to be a Latino or indigenous, or coming from a farm working community, low income or with special needs. And I remember calling my father and being so impacted by what I was seeing and touching and feeling and experiencing. And he reminded me that when he came to Mississippi the first time in the late 50s, he was a very young boy. He was around the age of 11 or 12, and he was in Mississippi. And he talked about how he, as his own personal story, felt like he could see inequities all around him, but he felt completely helpless. That he felt just completely helpless. And really, that's this inability to act or to do anything that would be in service to his surroundings. The second time he came back, he was 15. The third time, 17, and so on, as they were, farm workers that traveled through the states. And he said, all that time I felt hopeless. He said, but there's something different that I need you to recognize and be aware of. This you're talking about in the 50s. Here we are, fast forward, and it is the 21st century, and you're here, my child, a child of an immigrant parent that is a working child of a farm worker that actually has the ability to make change. So he said, so what are you going to do about it? You have all these feelings, you have these experiences, and this exposure that you have received. But my question is to you, what are you going to do about it? Because you actually are not hopeless. You can be hopeful. You could create the change and create the connections and be full of action and voice and magnify your voice because the circumstance has been presented to you. So it really was this full circle moment. And he said, maybe I was not the generation that was going to be able to make change, but now I've given it to you. And what are you going to say about the generations to come? And so that's a vivid memory for me when I think about the change that we can be together in collaboration, even for a community that maybe not look like myself, or have the same journey that I did. But there's a lot that we can do. And the question is, what are we prepared to do? What are we ready to do? And it wasn't an easy question to consider, but it just really burned a memory when I think back about my leadership.
Thank you, Michelle. That is so, so profound. Thank you for reminding me about that as well. So finally, consider someone trying to connect their professional work with their cultural legacy. What advice would you offer to that person?
I had to learn this the hard way, Aida. I had to learn this the hard way. And now they always say hindsight is 2020, because the ability to look back across 3 decades, right, which is kind of hard to say because then it starts to age myself, but oh well, that's what it is. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. Um, Hindsight is 2020, but I had to learn the hard way. I was so consumed early on with trying to fit into a particular mold of what leadership actually should look like, or what maybe society believes leadership looks like. And if we look across data that is available to us across the United States, we can still see that there are not very many leaders in executive positions that look like me or maybe have a similar story. Latina, child of immigrant, woman, variety of factors, that are factors. They're not the ultimate, but they're factors. So the data will show us that still I'm amongst a smaller population. I think that it's hard to be in a place where you're the first one. I was the first Latina in the role that I was at PCRC. I was the first Latina leader in the role that I'm in now. I'm one of very few leaders on a national framework when we're talking about education or solution building or even civic engagement, and thinking about it's very hard to be in a space where you're the first. I think the idea that I try to lean into, whether I am in those spaces or I'm trying to uplift new voices, is that it's hard to be the first, but you never want to be the last, and you never want to be the only. It's something different when you're the first versus the only and the last. I need to create pathways for others as I stand unapologetic in terms of who I am as a leader and all of the characteristics that feed into my leadership. I need to remember that I can't be the last in that space. So who else am I pulling in the space with me? Who else am I creating a pathway and moving out of the way? I think it's important for us to also recognize that, when we've been in a space for too long, and how we can actually start to become less of a leader and more of a gatekeeper. But how do we open the doors for others to walk through and understand our role as mentors, and upholding our language and our cultures and our rituals and our traditions that help others feel at home and comfortable and feel like they can step into their identity, whatever that actually means for them. But that's how we create legacy together. That's how we ensure the sustainability of the work that we're doing together. And that's how I've chosen to interweave my professional and cultural legacy.
Thank you so much, Michelle Vilchez, for sharing all that knowledge and experience with Conversations over Cafecito. We wish you more successes, and we hope this is not the first time you talk to us. So we will see each other again.
Awesome.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Aida. Thank you. Thank you.
Este ha sido otro episodio de Conversations over Cafecito, presentado por Esperanza United, antes conocida como Casa de Esperanza. Con este podcast construimos puentes y conexiones entre la investigación, la práctica y las políticas para inspirar respuestas efectivas, para eliminar la violencia doméstica y para promover relaciones saludables dentro de las familias y comunidades latinas. Para obtener más información, visite esperanzaunited.org. Este programa fue producido por el personal de Esperanza United y la música compuesta por Joey Horton. Soy Aida Negrón, especialista en comunicaciones bilingües. Gracias por escuchar. Hasta la próxima.
This podcast is supported by grant numbers 90EV0525 from the Office of Family Violence Prevention and Services, OFVPS, Family Violence Prevention and Services Act, FVPSA program within the Administration for Children and Families, a division of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. Neither the Administration for Children and Families nor any of its components operate, control, are responsible for, or necessarily endorse this podcast, including, without limitation, its content, technical infrastructure, and policies, and any services or tools provided. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Administration for Children and Families, OFVPS, FVPSA program, or HHS.